All right, we are back on the podcast where we are training men in spiritual fitness. I am Evan McGinty here with my friend Joe Barnard. Joe, how have you been doing?
Good, good. We had a nice Christmas, New Year's. So if anybody notices different backdrop, the two things for me every time is where can I find quiet and where can I find a working, internet bandwidth. So anyway, so in a
Those are
new
the
spot, but in the same house today.
two big challenges. Those are two big challenges. Where is the Wi-Fi actually working and strong? And yeah, where is it quiet? That's the biggest challenge. I'm lucky, we record this at like 6 a.m. my time, so nobody's awake, so it's quiet everywhere right now. But it's afternoon for you, so yeah, I'm sure difficult to find a quiet spot. But all right, so we've been talking on the podcast. We're kind of kicking off a series where we're trying to answer this question: what is biblical masculinity? What does it mean to be a man? We want to tackle this big question. Because yeah, it's important, especially during the time we find ourselves here in modern society. But also just you and I happen to be in this stage of life where we're raising teenage boys and we're raising them to become men. And we want to make sure that we're doing this in the way that the Bible has prescribed and the Bible describes men to be. What are we aiming our boys to become? And we want to do this well. And so you and I are just trying to take some time to figure out, okay, what does it mean to be a man? What is biblical masculinity? How do we give clarity to something that's become very subjective and difficult to define? The way we're doing this is by reading some books together. And so we've just chosen just a handful of different books that talk about masculinity. And we want to just interact with the content. And so the book we are going through today is called Future Men by Doug Wilson. And I guess let's just get started by a lot of guys. Most guys probably haven't read this book at all and probably will never read it. But Joe, give me kind of your brief synopsis of this book, Future Men by Doug Wilson.
Some guys will have watched videos by Doug Wilson. You know, he's gotten, I think, more popular, been around for a while, but on YouTube and social media. He's an interesting person. I liken listening or reading Doug Wilson to, eating salmon. There's meat, but there's probably some bones. You can choke if you're not careful, so you got to chew carefully and you got to pull out the bones as you find them.
Yeah.
Uh, he's somebody who can go from the profound to the ridiculous really quick. Often books lack clarity, and so they'll give great concepts, but you think, what do you mean? Doug has the opposite problem of he gets too clear and then almost legislates, and some helpful principle becomes this kind of silly law or
Yeah.
this kind of where something's, you shouldn't do it. So I think a book that is taking up the topic we're interested in. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to grow into a man?
Mhm.
One with lots of insight, humor, but also some applications you might want to be careful and not to swallow wholesale.
So after reading this book, what would you say is kind of the key concept that Doug is trying to get across to men, especially just in regards to us trying to answer this question, what does it mean to be a man? What's kind of that key concept that he's describing to his readers?
So the book is called Future Men. And really, it's not so much written to the guy in his 20s or 30s or even 40s who's trying to figure out what masculinity is. It's more written to the person who's trying to raise a future man. So it's a
Yeah.
book really for parents with their children. That said, I think as we think about what it means to be a man, it's not like you just become a man and graduate by age. So
Yeah.
you were a boy, and now because you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s, you're a man. No, actually, it's much more like, there's this garden. Part of it is kind of, been taken cared of, and the bushes are pruned and the grass is cut, and part of it's just wild. And so you have to continue to develop into being a man. So I think something that's helpful for guys, if you
Yeah.
read this not thinking about kids, is it's going to force you to think about areas that you've not grown up yet and that you
Mm.
still need to adult and actually arrive to a
Mhm.
healthy condition of being a responsible man.
Yeah. I found it helpful in him describing this concept of, yeah, manhood is where boyhood is headed, and just the idea of the best way to become a diligent man is to be a diligent boy. The best way to become a wise man is to be a wise boy. And so just developing those things early on. in our young boys is the best way for them to actually be those things as actual men. And I do like how he kind of he explicitly says, and it's not the only one, but like, hey, what is the opposite of a man? Is it woman or is it boy? You know, what when we think about and raising boys and compare them in their struggles and difficulties, is it that we say you're not acting like a man, you're acting like a woman, or you're not acting like a man, you're acting like a little boy? And he tends to
Right.
say, hey, man, we need to stop acting like little boys and become men. I don't know. What were some of your thoughts on that?
I think that's really helpful because I think we tend to take that approach that that femininity and masculinity, that these things are opposed, and so if it's not masculine, it's feminine, and that can be really unhelpful. I mean, there's a way in which these things are complementary, but you don't really want to define yourself as the opposite of,
Yeah.
say, a woman. But when you change it and it's the opposite of being a boy, and that there are boyish, that there are things that are immature, that have to be cultivated and have to be matured to reach what is their true end in manhood. I think that's a helpful distinction. And so I think that sets us up well to begin to
Yeah.
ask that question. Where have I not grown out of boyish behavior? And
Mm.
what's the difference between being a boy and being a man? And I think that's the way guys should be approaching thinking about masculinity.
Yeah, I think if guys walked away from nothing else with nothing else from this book, that's exactly it. Having that time to sit and reflect. What does it look like to be a boy? Where in my life am I still acting like a boy, no matter my age? You know, if I'm 50 years old, there may still be areas in my life where I'm acting like a boy and not like a man. Let's maybe get into some of those more specifically, because Doug does touch on some of these. Um, so let's think about just the area of sin, for example. How does a boy handle sin and think about sin versus how does a man handle sin and think about sin? So, how do we raise our young men to become men who handle and think about sin in the right way?
Yeah, and I think if you think of when any of us were very young children, we were completely controlled by our appetites, our
Yeah.
inclinations, whatever desire was in our heart. There was no self-control. There was very little discernment about what is right and what is wrong. And so much of the formation of a man is developing a healthy conscience,
Yeah.
developing a moral framework where you know the difference between good and evil, but also beginning to figure out, well, what are virtues, what are vices, and actually growing into the kind of virtues, the kind of character that displays mature, godly manhood.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is just that's one of these areas that guys maybe have never grown up. They've never really taken responsibility for the need to take ownership of their heart and actually develop the godly character that should be, the sign of real authentic manhood.
Yeah, and one of the things he touches on in the book is just this idea that boys can tend to think about sin as the possibility of it being hidden. Like I can sin in such a way that it's hidden and no one will see it. And he says, wait, men realize there's no such thing as a hidden sin. Everything is seen before God, but also that uh, all of my sin has its trickle effects, especially as a man, on the
Yeah.
people around me. That there is no such thing as like this personal sin that only affects me. That's how a boy would think, that even if I do sin, maybe it just affects me. Well, no, a man would realize this affects my marriage, my family, my church, and all that there are these ramifications beyond just me. So yeah, just taking seriously sin is, that's a big mark of manhood. You said a key word there that I want to come back to as well. You said responsibility. I think that's a big one. Okay, so how does a boy think about responsibility, and how do men think about responsibility, and how do we train men to be responsible in that way?
We've all been there. If you think back to what you said to your parents when you got in trouble as a boy, you make excuses. You try to get the blame off your own shoulders.
Mhm.
And he's got this great line. He says, "A refusal to make excuses is right at the heart of scriptural masculinity."
Mhm.
And I think that's right. That what we have to do as men is first of all just realize that you know we take responsibility. We don't try to find any way to justify things that we've done wrong.
Mhm.
That attitude, even the humiliation of it, is
Yeah.
nonetheless a sign of maturity. And so we've got to reach that place where um, we are willing to admit our own sin. And I think one of the things he says about fathers, he says that those that discipline others need to be under discipline themselves.
Mm,
And that sense of that we're accountable, that it's not like you grow up and now I'm free from accountability. I can do what I want. No, you've got to continue to feel the weight of that accountability, whether it's within your church, whether it's before God, whatever it is, but you're never living in isolation by
yeah.
yourself.
Let's talk about doctrine, being a learner, these kind of things. Okay, what is a boy? How does a boy handle doctrine versus how does a man think about and handle doctrine?
Yeah, I think one of the things he does is at the outset identify various roles. So these roles are kind of important to think biblically about what it means to be a man. And I think that's helpful. I think manhood, it's not merely like having more physiological strength. That actually, if we're going to have a complementarian perspective, if we're going to try to say male and female are in some way different, then
Yeah.
we've got to begin to think about, well, what roles do we have as men? And so he's got five, and we don't necessarily have to look at all of them. They might sound a bit strange, but you could find evidence for these things in the Bible. One would be lords, the sense that there's a way that in creation there's a kind of dominion that's ascribed to all of humanity, but specifically also to men. A kind of a husbandmanship, he calls it, like taking care and cultivating the earth from Genesis, a sense of saviors that we have to protect those under our care. He's got one glory bearers, the way that we reflect God's glory, but one of them is sages,
Mm,
that we're meant to be sages. And so I think um, what should be happening, and this culturally, if you think not necessarily in the modern world, but in other cultures, men were expected to grow up into people that had wisdom, you know, people that had perspective, people that could give guidance to younger generations. And that
yeah.
doesn't happen automatically. And so part of what guys should be doing is developing a right understanding of reality. And
Mm,
that's what theology, that's what doctrine is. It's just
yes.
truth. It's
Yeah.
fundamental truth.
Yeah.
Things that actually, like the same way, your house is framed to hold the roof up, you need certain beliefs that can hold up a lifestyle. And
Yeah.
so growing into a man is developing the right beliefs that are true, that can support life in a difficult, fallen condition.
That's good. Yes, and men are those who have convictions. Yeah, they've done that search. They have convictions, but also have the humility that comes alongside that, and that there's not this, pontificating of sorts, but that there's a humbleness about having these firm convictions. I think that, yeah, when it comes to having sound doctrine, what does it look like to be a man? It's being that lifelong learner, even. Boys don't they're not interested in growing and learning in that way. No, men, we say we're going to be lifelong learners and the humility that's necessary to do that. And yeah, obtaining the strong convictions over the things that matter. Um,
I think kind of with that, I'd say there's this interesting moment where more and more guys, they are developing like intellectual interest. So my son yesterday had a basketball game away in Newcastle and was taking a train back with his team. And his coach was reading Marcus Aurelius, this
ah,
classic manual to like Stoic thought. And it's interesting how often there are guys, reading some of these like Stoic classics or whatever else is popular. And I think what guys listening need to understand is the difference between just philosophy in general and doctrine. Now, there's great things to learn. Read the Stoics. Honestly, Jonathan Edwards would say they're the closest to Christian truth that you're going to find. But still, what we really need is we need to know the truth. And the truth is what we get from the scriptures. And so the first priority for young Christian men is really knowing your Bibles, getting a
yes,
framework of theology, and then you can add in the other stuff as you have time,
yeah,
but don't, do miss what's most important.
no, that's good. That's good. Okay, so sticking with this idea again that you can be the age of what we would say is a man, but still be a boy, right? That's kind of the concept here that he said. Okay, so what does it look like for a boy to be a husband or a boy to be a father versus a man to be a husband, a man to be a father?
I think first, and some guys, no matter what age you may be, may need to think about this, but part of what I think Wilson would say, and this is, I think, what the Bible would have us think in terms of, is if you're a boy, you should be looking toward marriage and fatherhood.
Yeah,
Now, that does not mean that in every case, everyone will get married and have kids.
yeah,
But nonetheless, that's the common pattern. And so in the point of contrast, if you think of our culture, which tells guys, hey, keep your independence as long as possible, you know, honestly, sleep around as much as you want,
Mm-hmm.
be the kid, don't be the dad, or be the kid with the kid. This is a radical different approach
Yeah,
where you should be training yourself so you can be a father. And the fact that you've had kids doesn't make you a father
yeah,
because there's a certain set of again, virtues and a certain amount of wisdom that you need and self-control to be able to father well. And so none of this happens automatically.
hmm,
It doesn't happen just because you put a ring on a woman's finger. That might constitute marriage. But if you want to be a husband in the biblical sense, it's going to require a whole different approach and understanding of marriage and a set of, loving characteristics. So
yeah.
these are things that, in a sense, we have to be training and preparing ourselves for. And if we're already in those positions, continuing to grow into men that can do this well.
Yeah, I think a boy looks at the role of husband and father and sees an opportunity to take advantage of power,
Yeah.
and so puts himself, sees it as a position that he can take advantage of that power. Whereas a man looks at these roles of husband and father and sees an opportunity for sacrifice and to grow in those virtues that are necessary to even, man, just the idea of some of these roles that God has given us is
Yeah.
overwhelming, really. And but a boy would say, "Oh, well, this is my opportunity to, be in power and to say, that this is how things go and all that." So yeah, it's just two different ways of even saying what does it look like to fulfill these roles and the sacrifice and love and compassion that's necessary to do this well. But let's think about now. He brings up this idea in the book of boys learning to be dragon slayers, and I'll be honest, Joe. I didn't physically read the book. I listened to it on audio, so I think I kind of woke up all of a sudden and was like, "Wait, he just said something about dragons," and so I may have missed some of his point. But I think what he was trying to get about is just how do boys kind of view the world around them versus how do men view the world around them. What's your worldview, and yeah, how are you living in that? So I don't know. Help me understand that better. How is it the boys look at this versus how do men look at it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to say one other thing just with the fatherhood, then we'll come back to the Dragon Slayers because I think that's a really, honestly, fun part of the book.
Yeah,
But I think one of the things, again, about being a man in the roles of father and husband means you don't make excuses
yeah,
when your household is out of order. And that's a hard one um, because we want to just say that this is the way it always looks, kids always rebel or that, it's always difficult. It is difficult, but there's that sense that we're the ones who are responsible and we have to continue to be praying into and in that state of dependence and seeking God's will and doing everything that we can to love our kids well, love our wives well, and raise up a family that honors God,
yeah,
recognizing it's not going to be perfect.
yeah.
There's no perfect blueprint, but the buck stops with us and we've got to be willing to
Yes.
admit that.
Yes. No, that's good. That's really, I'm glad you circled back to that. That's yeah, I think that's a key concept for guys to understand. So let's go back to the dragon slayer. You said what's the deal with the dragons? Why did you bring up
Okay.
dragons and why should guys think about this?
Well, so he's got a couple of quotes I'll share. One toward the beginning, he says, "Men who follow Jesus Christ, the dragon slayer, must themselves become lesser dragon slayers." He's talking about the fact that the serpent, Satan, he is a dragon, and Jesus crushes his head, and the fact that there's real evil in this world. And, we may not be, like my grandfather and probably your grandfather, Evan, who were in World War II and in some sort
Yeah.
of like, actual battle, but we are in a real battle spiritually every day. And that we are called to, in a sense, be, doing good things and seeing, pushing back the darkness around
Yeah.
us. And so this world, it is a fight, and we need, like Paul so often, who uses the metaphor being a soldier to be a Christian. We need that kind of mentality that whether it's the sin within, whether it's caring for our families, that this is a real kind of battle that we're in. And so he's got toward the end of the book another quote: Christians are a race of dragon fighters. Our sons are born to this. Someone ought to tell them.
Mm,
So if you think of if you were living 1,000 years ago, and your dad was a nobleman and a knight, and you were born in, and you knew from an early age that you had to learn certain martial skills and
mm,
be ready to grow up into that role of carrying a sword and going to a battlefield. That would affect how you thought of yourself and how you were educated in the home. And so there has to be some sort of dimension as we look at our own lives, we look at our sons
Uh-huh.
in particular, and think we're raising them for a battle. We're raising them to face an enemy. It's not going to be with a sword, except for the sword of we're thinking about the spirit of the Word of God. But nonetheless, they have to be ready to take a courageous stand. They have to be willing to face a real enemy, the evil one.
Mm.
And God willing, they will do things that are noble and worthy of carrying the banner of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I think all of that, should inspire a kind of sense of nobility within the heart of men.
All right. Well, that's good. See, I wish I would have heard that through the book. You do describe that a little better than what I heard or what I fell asleep in maybe listening to the book. That's the trouble with audiobooks, right? Sometimes you miss stuff and you're like, wait, he just said something about dragons, and where are we right now? I don't know what's happening. So thank you for giving me clarity there. I guess just to kind of wrap us up, I'll give you a similar question that I gave you last week. Just, if you're handing this book to your son and telling him to read it, what do you want him to not miss? Would this be a book that you'd recommend that men read? And what's the thing they need to not walk away missing?
I think so often young men, they look ahead and think, okay, I need to get a job one day. I need a career. It's important for me to make grades at school or that I can get into a college. And pretty much the only thing on the horizon is that they should be able to make money. I think it's really powerful to, this is a kind of famous saying that he quotes, but he says, the boy is the father of the man. That actually who you are going to be in 20 years starts today.
Wow.
And so as soon as you realize that, that should create a real sense of weightiness and of responsibility. And you should be asking, if I can look in the future, and yes, I need to make money,
Mm.
but I also need to be a father. I also need to be a husband. I also need to be a soldier, in the cause of the cross.
Mhm.
I have all of these kind of different things that I'm headed toward, and making money is just one of those. Who do I need to start to become right now to grow into being able to do those roles well?
Mm.
And I think that's relevant for guys who maybe are at middle age. You may
Yeah.
be in your 40s. Maybe you're already a man, but you're not able to fill the roles that you're in. Well,
Mm.
what today do you need to start to change so that next year you can begin to be a man who can
Mm.
finally really father his kids well? These are questions that are really relevant. And I think the basic idea is something that that men really need to contemplate. I would give, again, the warning, if guys take up this book, I mean, you'll find different statements that you think, where on earth did you get that from? Maybe using somebody dyes their hair purple is a sin, or that if you use the garbage disposal, it's effeminate. Doug Wilson, he really does litter his books with these kind of real strong statements of what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
So I would just tell guys, have a filter, think through it. Don't swallow any bones, but if you do read the book, you will get some meat that'll really probably strengthen you as well.
Yeah, that's good. Well, yeah, guys, we want you to be men and not boys. And so that's our aim, is to train you and help you develop into men of God, and to learn, what does that look like? What does that even mean? And that's the journey we are on ourselves. Joe and I are trying to discover and give clarity to, what does it mean to be a man? Not necessarily what is the culture's definition. We want to know, what does the Bible say about being a man, and how do we begin to do that ourselves? How do we raise boys who become those kind of men? And how do we train one another and have the kind of conversations that are necessary to be masculine and be men in the ways God has designed us and intended us to be? So I hope you will continue to join us on this journey, as we're going to continue reading a few more books on this and discussing it. If you do have suggestions of books you think we should read, you can send them in, and we may take a look at them. But y'all join us next time on the Cross Training Ministries podcast.